But I decided I wanted to own the kitchen and not work in the kitchen from like an existential point of view.
I'm Steve Cummins, and this is Careers Cast Voices. With my co-host Marcio Saito, we deconstruct the playbooks of CEOs, educators, and disruptors to give you the edge in your professional journey. Today, we're joined by Kate Crane, a former operations leader who is now focused on working with young adults as they navigate their early careers. Kate started out with an art history degree. She learned early on the difference between having a cool career and one that pays the bills. So then she added an MBA. She spent 5 years as a management consultant. And then her career took another turn, first as one of the early hires at DoorDash, and then at OpenTable as VP of Restaurant Strategy and Growth. And today, Kate is on Careers Cast Voices, helping us decode the modern workplace. So hi, Kate. Welcome to Careers Cast Voices. When I was first talking to you, I was very intrigued by your background. You're probably not a typical background for somebody in a tech role. You started out with an art history degree. I think you had a couple of jobs, and then you went back to do an MBA. And that seems to have really been a turning point for you. So maybe just talk us through sort of your early career and that decision to move from art history into more of a business focus.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. And I'm happy to dive in. I was pretty myopically interested in art history from an early age. I took AP art history my junior year in high school, and then went to study both art history and business at UT Austin for undergrad. And through that time frame, I had 5 different internships in the arts. So I was really kind of exploring the space. I worked in 3 different galleries, the museum on campus at UT, and then an experimental art space that one of my professors ran. And so I got to see a lot of different places in the art world, and ultimately decided I wanted to be in Chelsea in New York, which is kind of, at the time, was like the coolest of cool place to be. And I did all the right things to get this perfect job. I moved to New York. I have this idyllic experience in a warehouse, and it was so fun, so cool. But that was 2008. So about 6 months in, I came home from an art fair from Art Basel, Miami, and they laid me off a day later. There was just simply too much pressure and not enough revenue during that time period. So applied to 50 jobs over the next 2 months, got 3 interviews, and I was competing with people that had masters. So I kind of got to this like end of, I have a ton of internship experience, but I have 6 months full-time experience. I just wasn't competitive. So I had to really pause and say, what do I want to do with my life? Which was completely jarring and terrifying, being a little Texan in big Manhattan. In that analysis or that kind of introspection, I thought, I like going to yoga. I like watching the Food Network and cooking for my friends, and hosting dinner parties because we were all very broke and couldn't go to restaurants. So I was trying to decide if I wanted to go to culinary school or business school. And CIA, Culinary Institute of America, they require that you work for 6 months before enrolling. And I thought that's a pretty good idea. And so I talked my way into being a prep cook in a kitchen, and then was promoted onto the line in the first couple days at a fine dining restaurant in the West Village. I did that for a couple of months and ultimately decided, it was the most humbling work experience of my life. And there's a whole host of stories behind that short but impactful experience. But I decided I wanted to own the kitchen and not work in the kitchen from like an existential point of view. So I moved home, moved back in with my family, ate some crow. I worked for my dad for a year, and I applied to business school. For me, that full pivot away from this very myopic prep towards the art world, I needed more than a business minor to pivot in the way that I wanted to pivot. So business school was both a rubber stamp of a finance degree on my resume, the network that comes along with really investing and being present in a business school program, and also the time to explore lots of different careers and paths. So coming out of business school, I went into management consulting.
So you've packed a lot in there. There's three things I picked out of it.
There's a lot, yeah.
First thing is, just because something is cool doesn't mean that it necessarily pays the bills, right? So you learned that
Oh,
lesson early on. But then you did
hmm
pivot into something else that you thought would be cool, and decided to get that experience before you then went back to do the masters. And then the third thing, which I like, is you decided you wanted to own it, not work in it, which I think is a great phrase as well. Um, so obviously things were a lot different in 2008 to where things are now. How do you think that would be different if you were in that situation now, or for someone that is maybe in that situation and looking to do a pivot and maybe thinking about going back to get more education?
I think that the introspection is the same. I think that we know a lot more now about higher education and the rubber stamp of a degree versus the actual learned experience, that for my specific case, I would still go back to business school today. The network is paying dividends today, 15 years later, and I needed the actual education. But that's not the case for everybody. If the ROI is not there for what you're doing today versus what you're going to invest and what you'll make afterwards, then I don't think it's a necessary tool.
And how would somebody go about evaluating that? Because, an MBA is different to a master's in another subject. Maybe what they want to do with it afterwards is going to be different. Are there any tools or any suggestions as to how they sort of work through that ROI decision?
I'm going to give you the cheating answer, which is have a conversation with Claude.
Right.
Claude can talk to you about what is your current degree, what is your undergraduate degree in, what are you doing today, and what do you want to do tomorrow. Claude would say to me, yes, you have an art degree and you want to go into business. And I didn't just want to go into business. If I was going to go start a company, it would have been helpful to have the tools of an MBA. But if I was going to go bootstrap a startup, going to pay 150 or 200,000 or whatever the dollar amount is in terms of total opportunity cost and expenses and tuition, like, is that worth it? And that's a real math equation. So if you don't have those skills yet, and that's why you want to go to business school, don't overthink it. Have that conversation with Claude, and it'll help you through that ROI, that payback analysis. And then I think you have to think about, what do you want to do after, and what is that going to pay? Marketing pays different than investment banking, and what do you want to go use it for makes a big difference as well.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I do find it funny that, people will go to college to learn about entrepreneurship, right? And they will pay, to your point, 6 figures to learn about entrepreneurship when they could have spent those 2 years actually, being a founder's associate or whatever in a startup and learning on the coalface. And there's obviously arguments between the two, but for that startup mentality, I agree. The traditional route often doesn't make sense. Marcio, any thoughts
Mm-hmm.
on those two pathways?
Yeah, and I really like Kate's experience, and I think a lot of the young professionals today are gonna identify with that, right? Because I think in the past it was a lot more common for us to complete a degree and find a job and have a more linear career. I think that's becoming more and more difficult. And when I talk to young professionals, and I use the Ikigai framework to find the combination of what you love, what you do well, and what you can be paid for, but I say it's not aiming from the intersection directly. It is really about exploring and jumping around, because when you're starting your career, you don't know what you like to do. And my message to young professionals who graduate from college and are kind of lost is it's normal and it's okay to struggle. And as long as you're actively searching, you're doing well.
One of the kind of things I think to myself, I also coach to others, both formally and informally, is you have to struggle to grow. If your whole life is kittens and rainbows, there's unlikely to be a lot of growth. But it takes skinning your knee to build that experience of, ooh, like, hopefully you didn't break a leg, but you skinned your knee, you learned a little bit, and you're not going to do that again, or you're less likely to do that again. I like that thought from taking a job that you don't like and you try something else, or you're managing somebody for the first time and you go, oops, I didn't say that very well. I hurt their feelings. Like there's a lot, that metaphor, I think it works in a lot of ways through your professional career.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of that only comes from actually doing it, right? And I think that's often the argument against, because one of the discussions that comes up is, well, should I just do a master's directly after my undergrad? And I will generally tell people, nope, go get a couple of years experience. To your point, Kate, you learn from doing, and then the value of that master's is much higher because you know how to apply it. So you said after your master's, you went into consulting, and then I know you ended up working for two of the largest food tech companies, or let's say best known food tech companies out there. Mm-hmm. And you brought in some experience of the food industry, right? 6 months working at a restaurant. Do you think that was important when you were going through that interview process, that you could talk knowledgeably about it, or was actually having that MBA the thing that got you into those roles?
At DoorDash, they were interested in it, but it was not a needle mover. OpenTable, they care a lot more about it. And until about 2020, to be on the customer facing side or be in the revenue organization, you had to have worked front of house or have been a GM at a restaurant. I'll say that I was more successful when I moved into the merchant organization, onto the revenue side at DoorDash, because I'd been in a restaurant. My street cred was immediately higher because I knew the lingo, and I was more relatable because I had been in a restaurant.
Yeah. And it makes sense to me. And I think there are two types of organizations. There are the ones that insist that you have a deep familiarity with the industry. And then I think there are others where they're more about the job skills and actually maybe value sort of a breadth of experience by hiring people in from either side. I'm sure you've done a fair share of interviewing yourself. What impresses you with a candidate if they don't have that relevant industry experience? Is that something you dig into? Have you heard people that sort of give you a good reason as to why that shouldn't be a factor?
Yeah. I mean, I think I test a lot more behavioral and technical skills than I do for industry experience. I think you can overcome industry experience with empathy and good listening skills. And so I test for that instead. One of the concepts at DoorDash, so I joined in 2017. Our company was between like 300 and 400 people when I joined. And at that point in time, the hiring thesis was nobody comes from delivery. So who are we going to go hire for? And so it ended up being a lot of ex-bankers and ex-consultants because they're fundamentally first principle thinkers who have to go solve hard problems that nobody else wants to go solve. So consulting was still a lens, and was a lens I hired for in all three of my tech experiences. But I wanted to test for also, can you work with other teams? Tell me about a time where you got difficult feedback. I wanted to know that they could handle a very intense analytical test using data. They could build a model. They could interpret data. But you're testing for that first principle thinking more than testing for the industry knowledge. Right. You have to scale beyond that.
Yeah, so certainly one of the interesting things of being an early mover, right? The pool is pretty shallow, so if you don't like what you see in that pool, you got to look elsewhere. Marcio, I know you've done a fair amount of tech interviewing yourself. What's been your approach or your experience with this idea of relevant industry knowledge versus someone from the outside?
Yeah, I have always been in pure tech companies. So typically people have a tech background and not necessarily domain expertise. And I was lucky to work at companies that were very focused on the attributes of the candidate rather than previous experience. So at Google, we hired for people who are comfortable with ambiguity and that we evaluate would fit the culture very well. As long as there is a good cultural fit, you are part of of the pool of candidates you would consider.
Yeah,
Something.
I think that makes sense. And when you're hiring for well-known organizations, a lot of that sort of comes in naturally, right? You don't have to go search for people that are looking, to work in this particular segment. A lot of people talk about passion, and Kate, I get the impression from your background you were very happy to go into the restaurant industry. For a lot of B2B tech people, it's tough to have a passion, right? I've worked for a number of companies. Tough to say that I was passionate about some of these, little tech products that we were trying to sell. From your perspective, does passion play into people being successful in their careers?
I think it does, but I think that passion can show in a number of ways. I have just like a nerd passion for food and restaurants and the magic of sharing a meal. But when I was a consultant, I worked in oil and gas, and I worked on construction sites with roughnecks, and it was an entirely different experience. But I was learning a lot. I was learning about interpersonal skills, leadership, presentation. It's really where I kind of built my chops, doing public speaking and facilitating workshops. So I was so engaged and obsessed with being good at this that's where my passion showed up there. And so I think that you can opt in to being interested and to working hard. And that can overcome the like raw passion. But at the end of it, I wanted to go to food. And so my husband and I moved from Houston to Denver because we wanted to. And then I was looking for jobs in the food industry.
Got it.
So the personal passion went over.
Yeah, and it's an interesting perspective because you hear people, they really push this idea of you're only going to be successful if you follow your passion, which is great if your passion happens to align with a career you can get into, a role you can get into. But I think this idea of finding passion in something else makes sense. Marcio, you look like you want to jump in.
Yeah, I'm very passionate about this subject. I do think it's important to be passionate about what you do. The thing is, when you are early in your career, the image you have of what people do might not be true, right? When you watch TV, a doctor is always in the operating room. You don't know that a doctor spends more than half of their time processing insurance paperwork, for example, right? So I think it's very important for you to try, because a lot of times we learn to love something once we start doing it. And we have this amazing ability to rationalize what we do. So Steve and I, we worked into data center hardware stuff. But you can always think, right? I'm building the building blocks of the internet and I'm having this impact in the world. And you don't know those things, right? When you're looking from the outside, and what do you do? Oh, we build data center stuff. But then you learn about the impact it has and what are the good things it brings to the world. So I say follow your passion, but don't assume your preconceptions about what you're passionate about are true, and explore and experiment.
There's a Scott Galloway quote that in effect it says, the tax accountant might not love being a tax accountant, but they love the income they're generating because of that, and that's their driver. I think that is equally as relevant. It's not for everybody, but I'll say that when I was in this management consultant phase and kind of convincing myself to be obsessed with this oil and gas work, I was also at a point where I had never had the opportunity to be financially independent, like truly independent. And that opportunity to make good money and to work hard and make more, like that drove me significantly. And so I hope the listeners are hearing that like money's not a dirty word. Financial independence is the goal. So run towards it. And if that's what drives you, great. Hopefully there's like balance to be had and fulfillment outside of that. If your job is not the thing that's driving your fulfillment. But there's it leads to this whole other topic of work-life balance, which I actually hate that concept, or kind of whole person fulfillment and what's filling your cup. Because it can be work entirely, but it can be these like, proportionate other things as well.
Yeah, and it's expanding the idea of passion, because I think when a lot of people here follow your passion, it is, to a parallel to UK. Well, I love food, so I must go work in something that is food related, and maybe you'll get there one day, right? Careers are very rarely a straight line, but you've got to think about what are the things that are going to get you to that point. So maybe you don't start your career following what you think is your current passion, but you do follow a path that takes you further into what you want to be doing. So you mentioned management consulting a few times. Now that's an area that I think a lot of people early in their career want to get into, for the financial perspectives, but also because it can give you exposure to a lot of different careers and companies and what have you. I also think it is undergoing a lot of changes at the moment. One of the reasons being that you brought up earlier, Claude and AI, and there's a lot of studies as to how this is going to change consulting and how consultants need to tap into this. If you were looking at somebody who was thinking of getting into consulting now, early in their career, what suggestions would you have as to what they should really be trying to focus in on?
The first answer is do it. Go try, because the interview process itself is really, really demanding. And so if you throw yourself into the case prep, you will learn a lot. The frameworks that I had to learn to be successful in that interview process are still ways that I think about problems today. Thinking about internal, external forces, top line, bottom line, cost and revenue, like revenues and costs, et cetera. Like, I think it's a useful skill. 2 is go get a job, go get an offer. Like, don't be picky before you get the offer. Go pursue all of it. I've had some clients that pursued only McKinsey, Bain, and BCG, and then were frustrated when they didn't get offers. Well, they didn't even look at the next 5. So go everywhere, get an offer, and then decide. Then think about, what does your life look like? Where did you get offers from? And when you compare against them, like, then you can optimize. But even if you go get an offer from a firm that is going to be less than ideal because of your travel or the operating model, whatever, go do it. It is an incredible experience. Wherever you end up, whatever industry within the consulting practice, it will be a wonderful training ground for professional skills, as well as like raw professional skills, public speaking, project management, writing an email, stakeholder management.
And it's very much a foundational kind of role, isn't it? If you do that as one of your first roles out of college, like you say, you're going to learn a lot. People are going to see that as a very very solid foundation for building other things. And do it for a year, right? Then you pick your head up and look around, and you see all the opportunities that you have there. We're sort of now heading into another passion of yours, which is helping young adults, navigate the early part of their careers. So from talking to folks like that, what are the common issues that you keep coming across time and again?
A lot of it is confidence that they are qualified to do something, or trying to help them understand that they can create value, or how to articulate the value that they can create, separate from the roles and responsibilities that they've had in different work experiences. Don't not include the service industry and the retail, because there's relevant things around anticipating needs, client service. Maybe there's some minute thing that they optimized while they were in that company. Like, that's the mindset that I, as a hiring manager, want to hear. And so when I'm working with these early career professionals, I'm helping them tease out these things that they don't know yet how to articulate, and then giving them the confidence to stand behind it and say, I am qualified to do this. And I'll say that most of my clients are women, and that is also very relevant gender stereotype, that we often want to be qualified and certified before we go ask for the thing, rather than just jumping forward and say, I can do this, and stretching into a role.
Yeah, for sure. So a lot of it is about digging deeper into experience they already have and learning the lessons from it. A tactical question for you. So you have those entry-level jobs on your resume initially, restaurant server or whatever it may be. At what point do they drop off of your resume? Is it after you've had that first major corporate role? Or how do you encourage them to handle that?
You know, I all of mine are on my resume today.
Okay.
I think the internships, anything before my undergrad degree, are not on there today. I should have probably kept them on longer than I did, because there was still relevant experience. But I had have a different perspective today than I did 5, 10 years ago. Um, I think it's a relevant storytelling, that there isn't a gap, that there was work experience. You can have fewer bullets or no bullets. So the art gallery story, that's on my resume, but it's not, there's no bullets underneath it. I can tell a story about it. And if they want to talk about my experience there, like, happy to. And for food tech, the restaurant stays on the resume. And for non-food tech, the restaurant comes off the resume. But I think there's really relevant storytelling in there that is helpful to tease out.
Yeah, and sort of an extension to the storytelling, it could also just be an icebreaker as well. So as an example, the restaurant that you worked in Chelsea many years ago, I've eaten there, right? So when I saw that on your LinkedIn profile, immediately there was sort of that connection that, you know, up until now you and I have never talked about, but it creates something. You talked about confidence, right? People having confidence to talk about their experiences or their capabilities. I think that's always been an issue. I would imagine you've seen that it's gotten worse with social media because people are now comparing themselves to a much broader set of people, right? How do you talk to people about how they can handle that and sort of defend themselves against it?
Oh, it's so hard. It's easier said than done to tell them to ignore it, to get off your phone, don't scroll, don't unfollow the people that make you feel bad about yourself, if there are any of them, right? Like, control your own algorithm. This is silly, but when I have some friends that have tendencies towards feeling sad, I tell them to search for puppies. Search for puppies and stay on that video for a couple seconds. It'll reset your algorithm. I have a mantra: get up, dress up, show up. For the dinner, for the interview, for the happy hour with friends you don't want to go to. Particularly when I moved to Houston and I didn't really know that many people. I had a handful of friends from college that were there. And if there was a dinner I got invited to and I didn't really want to go, I was tired and I don't know anybody, get up, get dressed, put on a smile. And that mantra helps me show up for work, show up for an interview. If you're nervous, but you just think I'm gonna do the best I can with the things I can control, and I, kind of put blinders on to the other stuff. That's how I manage it personally. But I mean, that's an intensely personal experience for somebody else that may or may not work.
And there's been scientific evidence that actually just forcing yourself to smile does create an improvement in your actual attitude and mindset. So I think there's something to that. I know before I used to go into interviews, I would always put on some sort of very upbeat music like Def Leppard or Meatloaf or something to get myself revved up. But now you're saying puppies is the answer. So if I'm ever interviewing again, I'm gonna try a puppy video, but to maybe an upbeat soundtrack. Marcio,
Yeah.
what are your tricks for pre-interview to get yourself revved up?
I think when we are interviewing, we feel judged and afraid that they're going to ask something I don't know. I think it's important for you to take a step back and understand what the interview is, right? So if I'm a hiring manager and I walk into an interview room, I am secretly praying that you are the right person, right? I don't want to interview 50 more people. I have a big problem in the business. I need you to be the right person. And I think if you, as a candidate, you're aware of that, first, you are the best candidate they have because you are called for an interview. And if you realize that the hiring manager is more desperate than you for this interview to go well, I think you're going to be more confident, you're going to perform better, and will help you to position better, right? You're not there begging for a job. You're there, I'm here to solve your problem. And if you focus on that rather than trying to prove you are good enough, just focus on, I need to help the hiring manager to solve their problem. And I think if you do that mind shift, I think it's a good trick for you to walk into the interview more confident and perform better.
So to take this like a step further, because my first answer was around confidence, right? I do have some very tactical things that I coach on around prepping for interviews, and I think that there's, very little excuse these days not to deeply prep for a behavioral interview. Again, you can put your job description into Claude and say, I'm interviewing for this role. It's in this space, general industry. And what are the top 10 behavioral questions that I could be asked? What are the top 10 technical questions that I could be asked? And your prep for those are going to be very different. But for the behavioral questions, what I do when I'm prepping for an interview that I'm going through, I think about the behavioral questions, I think about my resume, and then I kind of map the examples to each question. And I want to have at least 2, if not 3 examples ready for each question in case I use it for another one. I'm a planner. I like to over prepare. And so that is also how I get confident and comfortable going into an interview, and is that I have that. And if it's a video interview, even better. It's on my screen down here. Like, I'm not cheating. It's my resume. Or if I'm going into an interview, that's my cheat sheet before I go sit down in front of the interviewer. But that prep is very possible. And furthermore, one more tactical thing is that you can video yourself saying the answers, and then ask, your preferred AI partner to grade your answer.
Yeah, I think that's smart. And that has changed a lot with Claude, ChatGPT, whatever it is. I mean, it can effectively become your interview coach, right? It'll give you feedback, and you have to be a little careful that it's you have to make sure that it's not being the very sycophantic mode and telling you that everything's great. But as long as you set it up correctly, I think that can really help. Earlier in the conversation, you mentioned about how remote work is changing management consulting. For someone who's just starting out in their career, maybe it's their first job, or they're a year or 2 into it. How do you think that changes their initial career curve, if you will, if they are in a wholly remote or a hybrid role?
Makes it really hard. I strongly advise people that earlier in their career to seek out an in-person or a hybrid role. It's possible to do remote. And I managed somebody that was straight out of college, right in the beginning of COVID. And this poor guy was at home, like he was doing a wonderful job on the team and far exceeding my expectations of somebody straight out of school. But the interpersonal relationships are just so much harder to build. The brand building is harder to build. I learned so much through osmosis, through observing people, for kind of like an apprenticeship model, and by people pulling me aside in the hallway after a meeting and saying, here's how that could have gone better. That's still possible to do in a remote environment. It's just takes so much more effort, especially in a remote world where you literally back to back 9 hours a day in meetings, which was what my calendar used to look like. There's very little time for that candid, in the moment feedback. And that's how you grow.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think the other thing you miss out on is the getting pulled into meetings. Somebody's heading down towards a meeting room and they say, oh, hey, why don't you jump in on this? You'll learn something from that, right? That doesn't tend to happen so much when it's remote. And then you mentioned one of the big benefits of an MBA was the network that you got from it. Again, early in your career, how do you build your network? It's from those people that you interact with and sit in meeting rooms with. So you talk to a lot of people, various stages, whether they're thinking about their degrees, thinking about graduating, thinking about pivoting, maybe. Any resources that you would recommend for people that are looking to make a move or try and get an idea of where they should be headed?
There are an infinite number now of things that are specific to your industry. I love Simon Sinek. I love Brene Brown. There's so much good content that is easily digestible.
Connecting to the previous question as well, we used to work in an office. Our manager was a natural mentor. Our more experienced colleagues were the technical coaches. The company would provide training and learning experiences and all that. And as you work remote, and I think that's the direction the world is going, now have to dedicate to learning and growth. And yeah, I think today digital content is the way to get both technical mentorship and career coaching. And that's why we are here, right? We are having those discussions so that people can learn, not by osmosis in the office, but deliberately dedicating time to learning.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Well, Kate, thank you for sharing your viewpoints with us on Careers Cast. So I know in your coaching practice, you work with particularly Gen Z, folks that are looking to maybe make a change or make a pivot in their career. Just remind us of your website. We'll put it in the notes as well, but where do people find you?
directionoverperfection.com. You can learn about me and my coaching practice. There's also a link to book time with me.
All right. Well, again, thanks very much. And we'll look forward to keeping in touch.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kate.
So, Marcio, another interesting perspective, I would say different to our previous guests. What were your key takeaways from Kate's conversation?
I really loved the flow of the conversation. Kate has this tagline, direction over perfection, and that's how a career starts. I like her advice of not looking for the perfect job in the perfect company because you don't know what perfect is at that point.
And I think the other thing that it tied into, we talked a little bit about passion, right? Should you have a passion for what you're working in? And what was noticeable to me is her passion built up over time, right? So she started out with what she thought was a cool thing to do, realized there was no money in it. And she tried a couple of other things. And then, I liked another phrase that she came up with, which is this idea of, I was working in the restaurant, but I decided I wanted to own it, not work in it, right? So she sort of built up that passion over a period of time as well. So as always, please follow, subscribe, and you'll get to see the next episode of Careers Cast Voices.